Mark Few and the Bulldogs set up an official visit with 2025 prospect Nik Khamenia at Kraziness in the Kennel. All signs are pointing towards the 6'7" wing becoming the team's first commit in that class of 2025. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Welcome to the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Lots of recruiting to get to today. We got a not-so-fun update about 2024 target Asa Newell. We got a more exciting update about another 2024 target in Zoom Diallo to get to. We're also going to talk a little bit scheduling updates as the non-conference comes together. But before we get to all of that, let's talk about 2025 prospect Nik Khamenia. We've talked about him a handful of times on this podcast. He's kind of been a somewhat under the radar target for Gonzaga. Of course, most people who are paying attention to Gonzaga recruiting right now are focusing on the 2024 class and the two top 15 prospects that Gonzaga is pursuing in that class. We'll get to both those guys, Asa Newell and Zoom Diallo, later in the show. But right now, it really looks like Gonzaga is putting a lot of energy and time into landing a player in 2025, Nik Khamenia. Khamenia received an offer from Gonzaga back in April, long time ago for the Zags. They also took him on an unofficial visit last year during Kraziness in the Kennel. So he's already been to Kraziness. He's already received an offer from Gonzaga. And now he's going to take an actual official visit back to Kraziness in the Kennel 2.0, running it back, watching Gonzaga's first public practice of the year, 2 years in a row. This will be his first official visit. Reportedly, he has not taken any other even unofficial visits, at least not according to 24/7 Sports and On3. They don't have any other unofficial visits listed. It's possible those have happened, but right now, it kind of looks like Khamenia is pretty heavily leading towards Gonzaga. He's got the only official visit, the only reported unofficial visit. Some exciting stuff going on in Spokane here with Khamenia. A little bit about him. He's a 6'7" forward. He's ranked 51st in the class of 2025 at 24/7 Sports. However, he's ranked 33rd in that same recruiting class at On3. He is from Harvard Westlake High School in Studio City, California. It is the same high school as Trent Perry. Trent Perry is the third player Gonzaga has pursued in the class of 2024 alongside Asa Newell and Zoom Diallo. Perry is a combo guard. I think he's ranked in the 60s or 70s. A couple different of the recruiting sites have him kind of in a variety of different spots for Perry there, but another player Gonzaga has pursued. Harvard Westlake High School, for the record, won the California State Championship last year, in part, of course, because of Trent Perry and in part because of Nik Khamenia. Right now, On3, which does kind of more advanced odds in terms of predicting where a player might go than a site like 24/7 Sports does. 24/7 Sports doesn't have any crystal balls. They don't have any predictions right now. On3 gives Gonzaga an 82.2% chance of landing Khamenia. I take these with a grain of salt, not because the people at On3, it's not anything against them. It's just that it's guesswork. We're still guessing, especially with prospects out in 2025. I don't think there are any prospects in 2025 that I would be more than 80% confident about anywhere, just because things can change. They can change. The rosters can change. They may not be interested anymore. Like, a lot of things can change between now and 2025, especially in the modern era of college basketball. Things can change right up until the last possible second. But it's hard to not feel at least some level of optimism about a player who, again, a reputable recruiting service has an 82% chance that he's going to Gonzaga. He's only known to have visited this school. He's only known to have scheduled an official visit there. So it definitely feels like Gonzaga is in a really good spot here with Khamenia. Again, not only did he play high school or currently plays high school basketball with Trent Perry, who Gonzaga has also pursued, has made an offer to, has scouted and all that. He was also high school teammates. Khamenia was high school teammates in AAU with Colby Brooks, who of course is a third-year walk-on for Gonzaga, a player who obviously a walk-on, but still kind of a priority walk-on, a guy who's gotten some minutes, who I think there's a very reasonable chance he ends up on scholarship this year, the way that Gonzaga has put players like Matthew Lang on scholarship in the past after they've kind of served their time as a walk-on over a couple of years. So his prior relationship with Colby Brooks, his relationship with Trent Perry, the coaching staff bringing him onto campus multiple times. Last year when he was here at Kraziness, he sat with Dusty Stromer's family. I think there's a reasonable chance that they have gotten to know each other. Of course, both both competitors in high school basketball in California together. I think the idea of Khamenia being teammates with Stromer is potentially an appealing kind of option for him as well. Now, there are other offers for Khamenia. As much as we're saying this looks like Gonzaga, and it sure does, and it sure feels that way, as confident as we can feel about a 2025 recruit at this stage in the recruiting cycle. But he's got some offers from some big programs, which, if nothing else, should make Gonzaga fans feel a little bit more confident about the style of player and the type of player that he is. Other offers right now for Khamenia include Illinois and Iowa, Kansas, Minnesota and Nebraska, Oklahoma, and a couple of West Coast schools in UNLV, UCLA, and Utah. So some solid programs out there. Anytime you got an offer out from Kansas or UCLA, you got to feel like, hey, maybe there's a chance that those schools could get involved later in the process if they feel like, hey, the rest of our 25 class isn't coming together, or we think some guys are maybe going to leave the program and we have some more space for some of those players. A late push from Kansas, a late push from UCLA, a late push from even, Illinois or Iowa or some of those other kind of premier programs could, of course, change the situation at this point. But one of the things that Mark Few and Gonzaga have been so good at recruiting for the last 20 years. Tommy Lloyd was great at it as well, but Gonzaga has continued to be good at this even after Lloyd's departure, is getting in on kids early, identifying talented players when they are freshmen, when they are sophomores, and doing the work, putting in the diligence to continue to keep those kids, in conversations, continue to discuss it with them, continue to kind of make sure that they know that they are a priority. Gonzaga has landed players this way a lot in the past. I think of Shemek Karnowski, obviously international player, so there is a difference there. But Shemek was a guy who Gonzaga started targeting really early. And at the last minute, before he officially committed to Gonzaga, there was a late push from Duke, like a very late push from Duke. And Shem would have probably been really good at Duke. It would have been a very different fit for him, a different feel for him, but it probably could have worked. But for Shem, he's like, I want to go to the school that's been talking about me for years, the school where I have envisioned myself. I haven't thought about myself in Durham, but I've thought about myself in Spokane. And I think those things really matter. And in fact, Khamenia had a quote. This was in an article written by Max Mendel at Inside the Kennel. This quote kind of, I think, encapsulates a lot of what we're talking about as a quote about officials. And he says, quote, "There aren't any officials or other visits that I have set. I do know the visit that I'm working on trying to set is to bring my whole family to Kraziness in the Kennel for an official visit." This article, end quote, was before he actually set that. He continues, "Location doesn't matter to me for my decision. I'm a family guy, and I know my family is going to want what's best for me and will support me. My main things are going where I can develop and a place where I can go and be appreciated for how I play." Once again, don't want to get anybody's hopes up too high, but it definitely feels like this is a young man who's going to end up in a Gonzaga uniform in the next couple of years. Well, unfortunately, we do have a prospect. We want to talk about a 2024 player in Asa Newell, who it doesn't sound like he's going to end up in a Gonzaga uniform after all. However, the Zags are still making a strong push for 2024's top point guard, Zoom Diallo, and we're going to talk about that and Newell's recruiting after a word from today's sponsor, Game Time. Life is always so busy, and one of the last things that I want to be stressed out about is buying tickets to events. Thankfully, there's Game Time, which has killer deals on last-minute tickets for all of the events that I want to go to. I've used Game Time for local sporting events, for concerts, all sorts of good stuff. And the great thing about Game Time is when you're choosing seats for events, you don't have to worry because Game Time has tickets or has views of your tickets from every single spot. You know exactly what to expect when you arrive because of Game Time. Forget planning months in advance. Game Time is the place for last-minute ticket deals. They have deals on tickets right up until the day of the event. You can get exclusive flash deals on tickets for football, baseball, basketball, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. Plus, the Game Time guarantee means you'll always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section and row for less, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. So snag the tickets without the stress with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last-minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. Folks, want to thank all of you for making Locked On Zags your first listen or your first watch of the day. Shout out to those everyday listeners checking out the show on YouTube as well. Folks, college football season, we are right in the midst of it, and Locked On is kicking up our coverage with Locked On College Football Kickoff Live, airing every Friday from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Eastern on every single Locked On College YouTube channel. Find Locked On College Football Kickoff Live every Friday from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Eastern Time on any Locked On College YouTube channel. You're not going to want to miss it. Well, folks, we got a happy recruiting update there in the first segment on 2025 prospect Nik Khamenia, but it does sound like Asa Newell, one of the premier players in the class of 2024, a top 15 by every site, a top 10 by many different recruiting services player in that class of 2024. He listed his top 4 last week. Now it sounds, according to Trilly Donovan, who's a very plugged-in reporter, kind of a mystery reporter on Twitter. Those of you who are on college basketball Twitter have certainly interacted with Trilly at some point in the past. He wrote an article basically laying out that Newell's recruiting was down to 4 and is now down to 2. And it sounds like it is going to be between Georgia and Alabama. Texas and Gonzaga were the other 2 schools on that list. Georgia has been the front runner, and they remain the front runner. And I want to get ahead of this because one thing that I've seen in YouTube comments, I've seen on our Discord channel, which if you want to join that, there's a link in the show notes. We're talking Zags 24/7. It is free to join. I've seen it on Twitter. A lot of conversation, and these conversations happen every time a player just doesn't choose Gonzaga. It's just like clockwork. Player picks another school. People say, oh, Gonzaga doesn't have the resources, doesn't have the recruiting, doesn't have the money. And now because of NIL, it's always money. Gonzaga doesn't have the money. They don't have the money. They don't have the money. This recruiting feels so far removed from being about money. And I really want to address that because I do think we're going to see conversations around that. Why would a player pick Georgia over Gonzaga? Because he's from Georgia. And not only that, because his brother plays at Georgia. His brother, Jaden Newell, is on the Georgia basketball team. This is old school recruiting, folks. This is how it used to get done, is you would recruit a player's older brother, you'd bring him onto campus, you'd keep him around. That way you get the younger brother. You'd forge relationships using assistant coaches. Asa Newell is very, very close, has a long-standing relationship with Georgia assistant coach Eric Pastrana, dating back to, of course, Jaden's recruitment. This is a person that has been a really close connection for Asa throughout his high school career, throughout his formative years. That bond is really difficult for a school, thousands of miles away in Spokane, Washington, to break. They tried. The reason that Alabama is ahead of Gonzaga right now is simply location. The reporting, again, from Trilly Donovan on his website was basically that Alabama is using the recruiting tactic is basically this is a system that makes sense for you. It is an NBA path. This style of play you play at Alabama is going to prepare you for the NBA. There are people in Newell's camp reportedly who are hoping he will go to Alabama, who are pushing Alabama because they think it is a better system for him developmentally. They think it is a better fit for him stylistically, and it is going to help him become a better player and raise his NBA draft stock. The article also says that basically Gonzaga offered all of the same things. Style of play fits his game really well. NBA preparedness is something Gonzaga staff can highly offer, but effectively Gonzaga got ruled out because he does not want to move across the country away from his family. This is, again, recruiting 101. This is one of the most common reasonings that is given. Does it mean NIL didn't play any level of a role? I don't know. I have no idea. It's very possible. I mean, it's almost certainly that he has a high NIL valuation, and that on some level, the amount of money being offered is a factor. I would imagine that one of the things that Newell's camp is probably trying to do is put a little bit of pressure on Georgia to give him a little bit more money by saying, hey, we are still considering Alabama. But at the end of the day, I think Asa Newell wants to go to Georgia. He wants to play with his brother. He wants to play with a coach that he's connected to. He wants to play at home in front of his family. It's hard to blame somebody for wanting to do those things. It's the age-old story in recruiting. It's how it's always been done. This isn't new age recruiting. This is old school recruiting. Does it suck for Gonzaga to lose a player who would have been a really great replacement for Anton Watson, who can space the floor, who can protect the rim, who can do all sorts of things? Yeah, it's a bummer. He would have been a great fit. But the fact that Gonzaga was in the top 4, despite being thousands and thousands of miles away from where Asa Newell is located, about as far as you can possibly get, that's pretty cool. It's a sign that Gonzaga is really involved. It's a sign that they got some money to throw around in my mind, because I don't think they would have been considered otherwise. It's a sign that high-level prospects are still seriously considering Gonzaga. This perceived dip because they haven't gotten a Jalen Suggs or a top, a 5-star automatic prospect in the last year or so, I think has got some people a little bit on edge. But they're right in the running for players that are definitely in that conversation. And in fact, they're right in the running for the best point guard in the class of 2024, the #1 guard in the country, Zoom Diallo. He's number 13, or excuse me, he's number, I'm not sure exactly where he is in 24/7 Sports. I don't have that in my notes. There he is, number 19. 19 ranked prospect in the 24/7 Sports. Again, #1 ranked point guard. He's from Tacoma, Washington. That's a huge part of the conversation. He went to Curtis High School. He's transferred to Prolific Prep. And right now, the update on Zoom Diallo is that the staff is going out to visit him. They have taken 2 trips in the last 2 weeks to Napa, California, where he plays at Prolific Prep. He is now their top priority in the 2024 class. He may have always been their top priority. They may have always preferred Zoom to Asa Newell. I'm not sure. But right now it is clear. This is the guy they are targeting. Diallo took an official visit to Spokane back in January in Portland. He has listed Gonzaga in his top 6 alongside Arizona, alongside Washington, alongside Kansas, alongside Alabama. They are right in that conversation right now to land, and USC, I think I skipped a school, USC as well. They are right in that conversation to land Diallo. Again, they have visited him twice in the last 2 weeks. They're going down to Napa. They're checking out his performances. They're talking to him there. He did recently wrap up an official visit at Washington, like last week. Some quotes there. I pulled this quote. It's a tiny bit out of context, I'll admit that, but one of the direct quotes he said about that was, "I will take an official visit there if I have to." Again, a little bit out of context. He said some very nice things about Washington, it being the local school. They watched him growing up. He went to a lot of camps there. But I have a feeling UW is probably not the highest priority on this list. I think I'm worried about Arizona. The Few versus Lloyd battles are going to be really intense for the next couple of years, for the next 10 years, potentially, depending how long those two coaches stay at those respective programs. Gonzaga's already won a few. They won Ryan Nembhard. Arizona's already won a few. Carter Bryant was a really top prospect in 24 the Zags were interested in, and then Arizona ended up landing him. But Zoom is kind of the big one. This is a big battle because Zoom Diallo wants to be in a high-octane offense. He wants to go. He wants to run a lot of pick and rolls. He wants to push the pace. He wants to be in transition, and he's going to fit both those schools really well. And right now, it sounds like Zoom is planning to take a visit to Arizona in mid-October and is hoping to commit before the early signing period in early November. It's not great. If he goes down to Arizona in mid-October and is fresh off that visit when he's making his final decision, that's a little bit of a leg up for Arizona. Doesn't mean he won't pick Gonzaga. Doesn't mean Gonzaga won't continue to visit him, try to get him on campus. Maybe they'll be able to find a way to do so between now and then. But it's a bit of a precarious situation. Gonzaga could really, really use Diallo. Once again, top 20 prospect in the class of 2024, 6'4" guard. He's really good in the pick and roll. He's really good at getting out in transition, big-bodied guard. I think there's a lot to really, really like about Zoom Diallo. And I think Gonzaga is absolutely in the running here. I think that all of these teams, they've kept this really close to the vest for Zoom Diallo. But I think every school in here is realistically still in this mix. He took an official to USC in August of 2022. Again, he just visited Washington. He's got a trip planned to Arizona. I think those are kind of the main schools in it. Kansas and Bama, we haven't heard much about them other than them being on this list. But the Zags got their hands full. This is going to be an all hands on deck situation if they're going to land Zoom, but they still got a really good chance here of bringing in what would be a really, really nice addition for Gonzaga starting in 2024. And again, the Zags have one other target in the class of 2024, Trent Perry. We mentioned him earlier because he is from the same high school as Nik Khamenia. Perry is a 6'4" guard from Harvard Westlake High School. He's the 83rd ranked player in the class, according to 24/7 Sports, but that jumps all the way up to 36 at On3, 42nd at ESPN, 59th at Rivals. Colorado, USC, Oregon, TCU are a handful of the other programs that have made offers. On3 is predicting Colorado, but not with a lot of confidence. I could see Gonzaga definitely pivoting here, even if they don't, if they land Zoom, but even if they don't land Zoom, I think they pivot hard to try to land Trent Perry. Not as highly regarded as either Zoom or Asa, but still a very solid guard to bring into the mix starting in 2024. We're going to close out today's show, switching away from recruiting and talking scheduling, because we found out that Gonzaga is going to play Arkansas Pine Bluff. They've been added to the non-conference schedule. Scheduling has been a bit of a struggle for the Zags this year. We're going to talk a little bit about that as well, closing out the show, all coming up after a word from today's sponsor, Bird Dogs. Folks, it's real simple. Bird Dogs make you look good. The Bird Dogs stretch khaki shorts are designed to fit slimmer through the thigh and leg, giving you a more sculpted look. Bird Dog shorts do the exact same thing as Lululemon, but they fit even better. They fit way better than regular shorts that are made of stiff, restricted cotton. Bird Dogs fixed this issue by inventing cloud knit fabric that looks just like khaki but stretches so that you get a way slimmer fit without having to sacrifice movement. Bird Dogs also uses anti-stink sweat wicking fabric that keeps you cool and dry all day long. So folks, go to birddogs.com/lockedoncollege or enter the promo code LOCKEDONCollege for a free white tech hat with every single order. That's birddogs.com/lockedoncollege or promo code LOCKEDONCollege for a free white tech hat. You're not going to want to take your Bird Dogs off. We promise you. All right, folks, closing out the show here on Locked On Zags, talking non-conference scheduling. It is October 3rd. As many of you are listening to this show, we are 4 days away from Kraziness in the Kennel, in less than a month, or just over a month, I should say, until the start of the college basketball season, a month away from Gonzaga's exhibition opener against Lewis Clark State. And it is wild that we haven't seen an actual announcement on Gonzaga's non-conference schedule. Still haven't seen it. We found out Gonzaga's playing Arkansas Pine Bluff because Pine Bluff released their non-conference schedule and Gonzaga was on it. That's how we're finding out about games for Gonzaga, as they slowly put together their non-conference slate. The Zags are going to play the Lions of Arkansas Pine Bluff on December 5th at home at the McCarthy Athletic Center, 3 days after their big game against USC in Las Vegas, return from Vegas, and then host this Lions team. This is the third school out of the SWAC Gonzaga is playing this year. They're also playing Mississippi Valley State on December 11th. And then 9 days later, right before the Christmas break, they will play Jackson State. Jackson State, Mississippi Valley State, Arkansas Pine Bluff, all coming out of the SWAC, all HBCUs. And we've seen Gonzaga play a lot of SWAC schools in the past, Texas Southern, Alcorn State, among the teams that we've seen in previous years. And look, I think it's great that Gonzaga plays these SWAC schools, because it is a money-making opportunity for these schools. Basically, Gonzaga pays them. They come to campus. Gonzaga beats them usually by 30 to 40 to 50 points. Those schools make money. That money is used to pay their staff and upgrade their facilities and various other things. It's a symbiotic relationship that happens in college football. It happens in college basketball. It happens in a lot of sports. Gonzaga has been involved in it in the past fairly significant amount of times. And I don't want to get too much into Pine Bluff. They're a bad team. The Zags are 2-0 against them historically. They beat them 110-60, so a 50-point margin of victory in the 2019-20 season. They also played them in 2002 and beat them also by 50, 92-42. So if anything less than a 50-point margin of victory would be the closest game that these two schools have ever played against each other. This team finished 9th in the SWAC, which is not a good basketball conference. They were 10-23 overall, 6-12 in conference play. The story here is less about the opponent and more about Gonzaga seems to be struggling to schedule games. And this isn't entirely new. Really good teams want to play Gonzaga because it's great for college basketball. It's great for them and their strength of schedule and their resume. And typically, really great teams are sometimes the only teams that feel like they can maybe beat Gonzaga. It's great for UConn to play Gonzaga. It's great for San Diego State to play Gonzaga. Those two teams were in the dang national championship last year, though. Like USC is a great team as well. That's a really star-studded, fun matchup. Of course, Kentucky and the 6-year scheduling deal that they have between those two schools, that's fantastic as well. Gonzaga's in the Maui Invitational, which is loaded. But other than that, it's been hard for Gonzaga to schedule games. They can't get true home and homes with very many teams. As much as we criticize Calipari and Kentucky for coming to the Spokane Arena instead of the McCarthy Athletic Center, at least they are eventually going to play at the Kennel. San Diego State's going to do it. It's going to happen this year, and Gonzaga's returning the favor, and they're going to play at their home arena next year. But those mid-level teams better than the SWAC teams better than the Big West teams that Gonzaga's playing, it's hard for Gonzaga to schedule them. They have Yale, who is a very solid Ivy League program. They, of course, have Washington as part of a regional rivalry. But for the most part, Gonzaga's either playing really good teams or very bad teams who they're often paying to play them. This is kind of, I think, the nature of the beast for a school like Gonzaga. St. Mary's struggles with it too, to a lesser extent. They don't have the brand recognition that Gonzaga does, but it is hard for teams that are likely going to beat you. It's hard to get those games scheduled. Teams don't want to come play at the Kennel. It's not hard to see why. It's not rocket science why teams wouldn't want to do that, but it's frustrating that we're here in early October. We don't have a finalized schedule. The games we are finding out about are predominantly not great opponents. We found out about the big games. I mean, I'm not criticizing the schedule in a vacuum because the schedule overall is very, very good because of how top heavy it is with UConn and USC and San Diego State and Kentucky and the Maui Invitational and even Yale and Washington. Like that's a good group of teams that you're playing right there. But you don't get a lot of teams kind of in the middle after that. You get a few great teams, a couple of mid-level teams maybe, and then you kind of go all the way down to the bottom. And I don't think that's necessarily terrible, especially for this really young Gonzaga team. Those kind of games, the games against, they'll play USC and Gonzaga will probably play 7 or 8 guys. They'll return December 5th, 3 days later. Some of those guys might be tired. Maybe Anton only plays 22 minutes, against Arkansas Pine Bluff. Maybe Ryan Nemhard plays 18, 25, and you get, a big run from Luka Kraziness, a big run from Dusty Stromer, big run from Braden Huff. Like, that's not a bad thing for a young team because Gonzaga, they might need those guys in the WCC. You never know with injuries. You never know with production. You never know if guys get worn down the year and suddenly, they need Kraziness to come in and give you 15 minutes in an NCAA tournament game. You want him to be ready. Is he completely ready because he faced, he played 20 minutes against Arkansas Pine Bluff? No, but is he more ready than if he hadn't? Yeah. So I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. I talked about this on the Mailbag Monday episode. I think playing as many games as possible is always the way to do it. Some people were saying, well, what's at what cost for adding a game that's against a bad team? Well, there's not really a negative. Gonzaga is not in a situation where playing bad teams is hurting their net enough to really hurt them. They've kind of ascended beyond that point. And if they're in a situation where, the committee is seriously looking at who they put scheduled in the non-conference to determine what seed they're going to get, that says a lot about how the season went. And I don't think it's something that we can pin on them playing Arkansas Pine Bluff. If they didn't play well enough to put themselves in a position where that kind of stuff doesn't matter, then that's on the team. At the end of the day, these guys want to play basketball. And I think playing as many games as possible is the way to do it. I don't know if they will. They could technically schedule one more game. I don't know if they will. Right now, their season doesn't start till November 10th. They have that exhibition opener against Lewis Clark State on the 3rd, but the season starts on the 6th. Most every other team is starting their season on the 6th. Gonzaga's waiting 4 days for their first game against Yale. I don't know if that'll be the case. Maybe we'll find out in the next week or so that Gonzaga's adding a game on November 6th. But as we get closer and closer, are the Zags really going to add a game to the schedule with less than a month until the game starts? Hard to say. So I think they might be done. I wish they'd add another game, but I'm kind of coming around to the conclusion that it may not be their fault. They may be trying and they may be failing because teams don't want to play them. Teams have already filled up their schedules. There's just a lot that goes into this. It's a very complicated job. My hat's off to Jorge Sanz and everybody else on the staff who helps put together these schedules because I know it's very, very difficult to do. But right now it looks like there's a pretty reasonable chance they're done and that their season officially is going to start on the 10th against Yale, but we will see. That's going to wrap us up for today here on the Locked On Zags podcast. Thank you so much for making the show your first listen or your first watch of the day. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button on YouTube if you have not done so yet. We are over 2,000 subscribers. Love to get to 2,500 before the start of the season. Also join the Discord channel if you have not done so yet. It's free. We're talking Zags 24/7 in there. There's a link on the show notes and on YouTube as well. Thank you so much for listening. And until next time, as always, go Zags.